Hello, everyone. I think we're live now. Um, well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us tonight. This is part of the On Women Festival 2022, produced by the Irondale Ensemble Project. The festival provides women identifying artists a platform to tell their stories. We started this festival in 2018, and each iteration of the festival has been different and unique, just like the creators and the shows that are part of it. Tonight, we are here for one of the artist exchanges, which are one of the things that we offer in the show. We have, in the festival, excuse me, we have three main stages happening at the space at Irondale in Brooklyn, New York. And we have a collection of online new media storytelling videos that are available online as well. And the artist exchange, which are conversations between the festival curators and their special guests. Tonight, we'll have a conversation that will be led and moderated by our very own Shannon Corenthin. Shannon, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Renata.
Of course. Just one thing that I forgot, to keep up with the programming of the festival, make sure you go online to irondale.org and follow us on Instagram at Irondale Ensemble. Okay, now the floor is yours, Shannon, and I'll be here if you need anything.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. I am Shannon Corinthin. I am the producing director for Hedgepig Ensemble Theater, which is a nonprofit theater company based out of Brooklyn, New York, which strives to reimagine the classics, creating a legacy of storytelling with gender equity at its core. My pronouns are she, her, and I do want to acknowledge that I am streaming, and Irondale is also located on the unceded land of the Lenape. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of work that is being done about recognizing Native lands. I have the pleasure to welcome to this conversation about Black women in the classics, Dr. Valerie Kurtz Newton, who is the head of directing at the University of Washington School of Drama, where she is also the founding artistic director of the Hansberry Project, which is how I have met her. Hansberry Project is a professional African-American theater lab that works to develop African-American voices in theater. She's worked with countless theaters across the US, and including but not limited to the Guthrie, Alabama, Shakespeare Festival, and the Mark Taper Forum, all of that good stuff. And I'm so happy to have her here today. Also joining us, hi Valerie, also joining us is NJ Aguna, who is a theater and film director and multi-hyphenated artist, who's also based out of New York. She's directed work by Shakespeare, Chekhov, Carol Churchill, and many, many more. She's worked on the international and the national stage, exploring classic texts, developing new plays, devising and investigating new ways to explore trauma and mental illness through theater. And this is a snippet that I found on your website, NJ, that I think is wonderful, is that you believe that theater shows us our history, illuminating things we have forgotten. Welcome, NJ.
Hello.
Hi. Just let you take, thank you for joining us today. So glad to have this conversation. If there's anything that I've forgotten about in your intro, let me know. Feel free to add it at any time. But this conversation is about Black women in the classics, which is something that I've felt very passionate about since college, which is actually how I met Valerie Kurtz Newton, which is what I've said. I did research in college about African-American women playwrights and their history and found out some wonderful, wonderful things. Some things about how they were the leaders in the Harlem Renaissance and all that good stuff. So that's how I got into this work. But I would love to hear about what brought you into the classics, or what drew you to the classics. Whoever wants to, take it away.
Sure. I guess I'll start. The thing that drew me to the classics was my grandfather. He was a professor of literature and history. So I grew up learning mostly about classic literature, and then moved that into plays, started reading more classical plays when I was in elementary school, and I went to a Shakespeare summer camp in Maryland when I was about 9. So I've always had a love for classics, but that is where it began for me.
For me, I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and I was reading Maya Angelou's autobiographies. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And she talks about how she, in the time when she wasn't speaking, she fell in love with Edgar Allan Poe, and Poe led her to Shakespeare. And so I sort of followed that same track of Poe and then poetry into Shakespeare. And I really got interested in the Shakespeare plays where there were Black people.
Mm.
And there are a couple of them, Black men and Black women in some Shakespeare plays. And that sort of got me interested in the European classics. Then I grew up a little more and experienced Black women playwrights through history. And that's sort of when I realized that we've been writing classic plays in this country for a really long time. But that sort of was my entry to it.
That's a great point, that we've been writing classic plays for a long time, which kind of brings me to the question of what you both think makes a classic. I know that in Hedgepig, we grapple a lot with that question because we work on classic texts and bringing classic texts written by women. And so a lot of the times we're like, okay, what makes a play a classic? What is a classic? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it must be well crafted, right? I think it must be well crafted. And there are lots of different forms that a play can take, structures that a play can take, but whatever the structure that it takes on, it needs to be well crafted. Mm-hmm. I think it needs to actually be curious of something so that we're hungry to go along the trail with the thinking. I think it has to make us feel something. Hansberry has this quote, let our audiences become so exhausted in the amphitheater that they welcome the pamphlet and the debate. So if you want to change things, you have to actually engage people. I think they also wear well over time. You know, there are some plays that are of their time, and then there are some plays that are timeless. And a great example of that is Childress. You know, Alice Childress's work, Trouble in Mind, is a timeless play.
Yeah.
Wedding Band is a timeless play. She has written classic plays. And so that idea that they are of a time, but they also transcend time in some way.
Yeah. I agree that they need to be curious about not only the time that they're in, but just something that sparks something within audiences, that it's either a mirror of that time or also just like a thing questioning that time. And you mentioned the word timeless, and that is what I believe classics need to be, something that is timeless. There are some things that we are calling classics in the Western canon that are not classics, but
we confuse popular or profitable with timelessness and artistry.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I think there are a lot of times when you talk about, which I want to get into, about plays written by Black women, obviously that's over here, that are classics. And a lot of the conversation around that is, well, they're unknown or they're new plays, so I can't produce them because no one knows about them. But how does a play get known when you don't do it, right? So there's that level of like, yes, this is a timeless play and it needs to be done, but no one wants to do it, you know?
There are some plays, like, I remember a gazillion years ago in the early 90s, doing a reading of a play called The Mojo and the Say So
Mm-hmm.
at Hartford Stage. And the artistic director could not be convinced that the play on the page had it. So even when it was read out loud and people enjoyed it, couldn't convince that artistic director to put the play up. And so there's something else going on in that situation when an audience has got a proven interest in the play. And but then, like 15 years later, I was able to put it up when I was the producer.
Right.
And audiences were thrilled by it, and they came and they showed up for it. So that's why we have to be our own producers. So that we get to control that, because sometimes other people can't see inside a work the way that we can.
And it's one of those things where we are the best advocates for some of these things, but because the people who've had the power for the longest time or had the access are always like, I have my finger on the pulse, when they're not actually even in the communities of which they are claiming to serve. They're on the outskirts deciding what is best for that community. And that's not always what is being heard, listened to, or even said. What they're not asking for what those producers believe that they're asking for.
It's like, Mitt Romney and his binders of women.
They
have binders of playwrights.
Yeah.
If you're not in my binder, you don't exist.
Right.
That's the problem.
And how would you say then, because I know that you both do work in terms of like bringing more visibility to our stories and stuff. So how would you say that we should go about bringing those stories to the forefront, or like what has been the best way that you found to bring our stories, to put them on stage, to make them have a space?
Another Hansberry quote is, if you want to do something, you have to do something.
Yeah.
Which that's just, the question is, I'm still trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? I'm very like, yes, I'm here to advocate for these works to get on there. I am not a producer. I don't do money. I tried several times, and I was like, oh, this is not my portion. This is not for me. The Lord did not give this skill to me. So then it's trying to find people that will celebrate and help bring that to the forefront. And that is also another, task and thing that I feel a lot of Black female directors who work in classics are trying to do, finding those partnerships that you can bring these things to the forefront, where someone is like, yes, I believe enough, here's money. And you're like, thank you.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I think that another part of that particular issue for me is during the pandemic and a lot of the racial, they call it a racial reckoning. I'm not sure if that's actually the right word, but whatever we're doing racially in this country, there was all this decision that said, white artistic directors should resign so people of color can have those vehicles. And I said very clearly, I don't want that job. I want the money inside that institution to tell my stories. I don't want to run that institution. They're not ready for me.
Yeah.
Right? When I look at that board is not ready for me. That's why white people, quote unquote allies, have to stay where they are and prepare the way.
Yeah.
So that when an artist of color becomes the artistic director, there's a mission that serves them. There's a board that serves them. And rather than have us try to push the rock up the hill, we need to be invited in at the right moment. I don't want to lead an organization where I have to do all this training work and convince people that the changes that are coming are not just good for them, but morally right.
Yep.
That is justice in action. So in the meantime, this thing about, when you're not the producer, it's a lot about how you needle, how you cajole, how you embarrass, how you challenge. I spent a long time out here in Seattle saying that there wasn't a Black person, an artist of color, on any of the staffs of the major theaters who was contributing to decision making.
Yep.
And I would say it everywhere I went. I got a lot of flack for it, but no one could argue with me.
Right.
It was a truth, right? We have to tell the truth to people and encourage them to do the right thing. Encourage them to not want to be that thing they are, not make the way they're making, and make a new way. And if they're going to make a new way, they can make it with this material.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they get surprised. They're like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know that Childress did that. I didn't know that Hansberry did this. I didn't know that Grimke did this. I didn't know that, Marita Bonner wrote this play. When we talk about, non-traditional plays.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, Andre.
No.
No, it makes me think of just the work that we do as Black women anyways, and just the space that we inhabit, but especially in theater. You were saying everything, and I was just thinking about how something in my research that I found out, which kind of infuriated me, but also pushed me is, and I mentioned this a little bit, is in the 1920s, a lot of Black women, especially in New York, but just everywhere, were putting up plays in their living room. They weren't able to put on stage, so they were doing their living room plays, which is what I like to call them. And they were producing them and bringing in their family and community members and telling their stories and telling their lives, on stage, because Black stories didn't belong on stage. And the first produced, fully written by Black women play was in 1916, and it was Angelina Weld Grimke, but that was still a story that was for white people. And that angered the Black community, because it was a story that was that was meant to educate white people. And while that's all well and good, you have like history of women putting stories, in their living room and trying to get out there. And I was just thinking about that and how also those stories haven't changed. I read those back and I'm like, that's what's happening on the news, And it's like, how, at one point do we okay, we've done the educating, please, take it from us, help, support, how do we get to that point of just we've done the work, it's up to you to just do it,
I feel like we're at that place. I feel like we're at the precipice. There are so many people who are like, I'm not here to educate you, sorry, Google.
Yeah.
Right? That exists now. I think we're at that place where we're really we're at a place where we want to push more for the stories, right? And less for the I'm educating you in this moment in this way, you know what I mean? And also in the ways that we are using language, to push that forward, less explaining in the room that Chile is not Chile, it's child. You know what I mean? We're just I'm not going to explain this to you anymore, right? Yeah. That's what it is. And the challenge of challenging people who are reading these stories to do your research and actually get into all of these mediums that have already done the work for you, and that in the heightened renaissance of television, we're bringing back more of those TV shows that are starring Black people by Black people, so that it's oh, I am now understanding parts of those stories so that I can open up that theatrical sphere, and I think it's that push even more so.
Yeah, and this might be a generational thing. I appreciate this idea that I'm not educating anymore, but I'm just old enough to be cynical. I don't trust them to educate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if I want them to know a thing, I need to be willing to tell them a thing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But what I don't want is to have to tell it to them more than once, right?
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I could say, just figure it out, Google it,
Yeah.
because what they Google and what's the truth of my reality are not necessarily the same things. Because we have what was it that 45 was Kellyanne Conway alternate facts. I just worry that they're gonna march through the field of alternate facts and come back with an awful crop to fill the stores for the winter. I'm not eating that stuff that they find.
All that fake.
Yeah.
I just feel like we need to be involved, and not the intention need not be to educate, but the fact of what it is we do is inherently going to be new information, and I want them invited to come and get the information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's a thing that I'm really interested. I appreciate young people saying I'm not doing that, but then I'm like, but when they're acting a fool,
Yeah. Yep.
who's gonna help them understand not just that they're being a fool, but why they're being a fool?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the hard thing. I don't feel like it's my job to educate white people, except I live in the fifth whitest city in the country. It's not my job to educate them, but if I want to be treated differently, it is my job to tell them what my boundaries are, why my boundaries are what they are. So I think that's a thing we have to figure out is what's the balance between our emotional labor and our own responsibility to build the world we want to live in.
Yeah. I think part of that balance, and the balance that I'm constantly trying to figure out, is because I live a life as an educator a lot of times. So I do a lot of undoing racism education as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it is because I have space. A lot of times I'm like, I do actually have the space to take on this problem, this thing, when I say a lot of times when we get into that Google it kind of conversation, I feel like it is those people that no longer have space to take on.
Mm-hmm.
It is now become a burden to them. You know what I mean? So I'm always constantly trying to figure out what is that balance for real,
Yeah. I sometimes feel disconnected from it because I feel like we're in a silo here in New York because we're going through a sort of renaissance, not even barely, of like Black women in the classics, with Trouble in Mind that was on Broadway, Wedding Band that was at Tofana, Rusnega in the Scottish play. So, you see Black women take a bigger role in the classics, but I don't know what's going on in Indiana. I don't know what's going on in Utah. I don't know what's going on in Seattle. And I knew somewhat of what's going on in Seattle, but there's here, I get to see it and I see myself reflected on stages. And so I get that of I'm tired of having to explain it to you because it's being done, just Google it, it's here. But I can imagine when you're in a different space, that this isn't as accessible. There has to be some teaching that goes on, which, is important.
Yeah.
I do think there's a difference from being expected to teach them
Mm-hmm.
and deciding to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're expecting me to teach, then you need to pay me to teach.
Right. Yes. Pay me for the labor that I'm giving you. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
In terms of theaters in like Indiana and Utah and all of those other places. they are at a weird crossroads. And I only know this because I am in contact with a lot of theaters that are now having this this rise of not so many theater artists, but just even historians, like Black historians being like, okay, what is the story of this community? What is the story that we're of our people in this community, and how do we tell it? There's a shift and a rustling, because I know I've been asked several times to come into different places to do to teach devising to historians. Like, I want to put on this play about how the slaves built this college. And you're like, okay, here we go. We're going to talk about what you want it to do for the community. What was it supposed to do for this university? Was it supposed to do at this time? So I think there's a rumbling, and it's interesting, because I'm wondering if it's going to take off, or what will come of that.
Which brings me to this. I told Valerie I was going to bring this up because I think this is such an interesting topic. You were talking about, bringing up history and who's putting on these plays and what that labor is. And when I met Valerie years ago, when I was in college, one of the questions I asked, which her answer has stayed with me, was when we talk about the classics and plays written by women, how important is it, or not how important is it, but does it matter if we're not the ones telling it? Like, does it matter, or does it matter more that they're just being told? And this was in 2015, and still to this day, I think there's some stories that just need to be told, right? That they've been in a lockbox for too long. And at this point, it's just like, get it on the stage. That way it's done. And that way we can tell it. But I just want to start that conversation about, especially when we're talking about classic plays by women, that it's not just, Alice Childress is amazing, but, we're not going to do Wedding Band and Trouble in Mind for years to come in rep, right? Like, we need to represent we're not just going to do Raisin in the Sun, right? So yeah, just want to launch that conversation.
Well, I think that part of it for me, the answer that I gave you, is because I live in Seattle, right? So if I want to see more Black plays done, I have to acknowledge that maybe a white person's going to direct. The problem we had here was the Black people could direct at all those small, don't pay much places, but all the Lord A, Lord B, Lord C, the Lord contracts were all going to white people to direct the Black play, or Black men and white women to direct the Black play. That was the problem that I had, was like, would I rather that a white woman direct the play, or that the play not be done at all? I would love for it to be done with a Black woman at the helm, but that's not going to happen.
Right.
I want the story told. And I want to be able to critique it for all the ways in which we weren't involved. But I'd rather see it happen than not see it happen.
Yeah.
And there's a big divergence within communities about this very question. Yes, I know there's school of thought that says if you can't get Black person to do this, and this, don't do the play.
Yeah.
That means that there's a lot of plays that are not going to get done.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm of almost the same mind, that I would rather see it done than not done, but also I would love to critique it. As a Nigerian American, when Schoolgirls was done, I had a lot of thoughts.
Yep.
And that's the thing, though. That's where the courage of the artist comes in, right? I make it and I put it out there, and I know that people are going to have opinions about it. Sometimes they're going to love it, sometimes they're not going to love it, but this is what I made.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The time that I had, this is what I made.
Yeah.
Versus, when I say I'd rather have it done, it's true that a little dagger goes into my heart when, I really love that Trouble in Mind made it to Broadway. I wish that a Black woman had directed that play.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm proud that the brother did it and that it was a good job and all of that, but little
Yeah.
tiny dagger went in my heart.
Yeah.
I'm glad it got done, that she got
Yeah.
her Broadway due, even if a sister didn't get to direct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I felt about it. And I said this to another person recently. I was like, the challenge is also, and I find it also with Middle Eastern work, I find it with like a lot of work where I'm like, get someone on the other side of the table
Yeah.
who's loud enough to, you know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
is, yes, oh yeah, we have this white woman directing, and it's like, great. I know 5 Nigerian directors who could have been an associate director, who have
Yeah.
stakes that
Yeah.
can help you even with like dialect, because some of the dialect was like, okay, here we go. But I
Yeah.
want you to see that culture. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to see the fun parts about it, and in a way that we're not re-traumatizing audiences, with the little amount of plays that they like us to do, so it's just like, I want to see it done, but I also want those who are like, well, I said yes to this and I'm going to do it, to actually do the work and getting other people on the other side of the table.
Yeah, I went through a spring of being the cultural other in the rooms with what I was doing, right? I put up for Seattle Rep Selling Kabul.
I love that show.
Right, and I directed it. I had a cultural consultant, and then I also relied on the actors in the room to
Mhm.
bring their lived experience, and we made the play, and it was pretty well received by the community. And then I went from that into a workshop with Mfuniso Odofia. I was in a room with 11 Nigerians, right?
Yeah.
So, and they all understood some things that I didn't quite understand, and I got to uh, mold the parts that were where the relationships were clear, and I could ask questions of it, and they could explain to me, and I could say yes, but, and we would just do the thing. But I had people in the room who knew the
Mhm.
culture that we were representing, and I think that that's most important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
sometimes when a white director is directing, they forget that it's not their world.
Yeah.
And when they remember, they have a shot to make art. When they don't remember, they have a real likelihood to do harm.
Yeah.
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 So I love thinking about that question, because I also think, there's, at some point, stories have to be told for us to then have a jumping point to then do more. Like,
Mhm.
unless we work in a system that's working against us, right? So we need to find a way for us to find that, to open that door. And sometimes it is just having that story be told, so that it's been told, and then we can come in. And I think about that with Shakespeare as well, for the longest time, still kind of. There are a lot, when you do Shakespeare, it's now maybe a little bit more, but the cast isn't multiracial. It's very white. And that's changing a little bit now. But that's another thing. It's like, okay, unless you change the director, or if it is multiracial, it's because it's set somewhere. It's not just in the US, it's because it's set in Spain, or it's set in Africa, like, it's not just set in the US, and it's representing of our community that we live in. But that's why I agree with it. And that's why this question stays with me all the time, especially with the work that I do. Because I'm like, sometimes I'm like, no, I don't want this play to be done by anybody else. But it should be. Like, it's a classic. It deserves to be read. It deserves to be done. And if it's not done by a Black woman first, then so be it. But it's out there, right?
When I got the job directing Selling Kabul, then the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. And I went back to the producer and I said, am I still the right person to direct this play, or should an Afghan direct it? And they said, we'll make sure we have a cultural consultant. We know how you are with the actors in the room, so there'll be representation in the room. And we know that you're really good at family dramas, and this is a family drama. So that's how I got the gig. And I understand that there's some Afghan Central Asian director who's pissed as hell that I got to do that play. Because I know when I watch white women direct Black women's plays, that my first instinct is to feel like something's been taken from me, which is irrational, but that's how I feel. So I know what it feels like when someone outside of the ethnicity of the play directs it. When I directed Motherfucker with a Hat, Latinos in Seattle were not all happy. Right? But as a director, I also don't want to only get to do a certain range of plays.
Right.
I want to be able to direct all kinds of plays. I want to have the experience of interrogating a culture that is not mine. Right? And doing my best and getting as much information and research and support as I can to tell an authentic story. So that's the thing. And I think it's the same for actors.
I believe so. Yeah.
I think so.
Do you only want to play the Nigerian character, the one in out of every 187 million who actually get to be in a part, to be in a story? Is that all you want to do?
I mean, no, but it's also
I'm not saying that doing it is lesser. I'm just thinking about the pigeonholed nature of being essentially put in the same role over and over and over again.
Yeah. And I mean, that is just, as a director, I don't like just doing one thing. I love doing multiple things, but I always I do the due diligence of having the extra person on the other side of the table that I can, move with and talk to, especially when working on plays from the Middle East or even like plays from China and Japan. So because there are cultural similarities and then cultural differences, and then what is it to bring it to the audience in this place and tell that story in the most authentic way, is always the things that I'm teetering and questioning and trying to discover and understand,
I think that if we always have to be the thing, then we are dismantling one of the most important factors of theater, which is the ways in which it teaches us empathy. Right? You don't have to be like me for me to feel what you're going through. And so however we maintain that part of the muscle that allows us to be open to experience or to share a kind of feeling or understanding of a situation, I think that's the better thing, which is why, I don't care, get the story told.
I think that speaks to, when we were talking earlier, to what makes a play a classic, the timelessness of it, right? Of like, it feels like we could always relate to it in some way. I don't have to be or have the same background as the story that's being told, but because there's that thread of just timelessness and I can identify with the struggle or just the concept, then I can relate to it. And that's what makes it classic, Speaking of, I want to hear what's one play that you believe to be a classic that's yet to be performed or that is underperformed that you think needs to be on stage? A lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Many of them are being revived and retrieved right now. So it's like Wedding Band would be one of those plays,
Yeah.
right? I think that looking at Marita Bonner's The Purple Flower
Yep.
would be one of those.
Yep.
You know, I think that there is something in some of the Zora Neale Hurston work
Mm-hmm.
that would be interesting to take a look at today. And then I think, you know, there are other ways of thinking about non-traditionally casting or color consciously casting plays. One of my best experiences as a director was when I directed All My Sons with an all-black cast. It wasn't an all-black cast. There were 2 white roles. And I decided that the factory was here in Seattle, like a Boeing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were able to put Black people and white people together in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It was very specific, but it resonated with my community.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of how I adapt and shift a thing to resonate deeply in the community I'm in is really important. So there are shows like All My Sons that I think could be interrogated to happen differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sidney Brewstein is another one of those, the plays, Hansberry's play.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then there's, you know, there are all the musicals. There's all the Vinette Carroll musicals, and
Wonderful Town.
yes, there's just so much, a wealth of material there that's worth checking out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree. No, I think also I am shamelessly plugging Hedgepig's list, but we also put Les Blancs by Hansberry on there last year, which I think when I read, I was just like, how is this not, I think it hasn't been done that much. It's been done. I think it's done at the National Theatre in 2020 in London, but it's or a couple years ago, I could be wrong on the year, but it's, you know, it's one of those plays that feels so timely and timeless, especially with how history is going and how history has gone. It's one of those plays that it's stuck with me, and definitely I'm like, this can be done again. This can have a second breath here, for sure.
That was one of the exciting things about the Broadway season and all the excitement around the Black plays, that you have Childress and Sean Gay in the same season.
Yeah.
Was pretty special.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and also Sean Gay has other plays that are, I would love to see another production of Spell Number 7.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Which also begs the question, when does a play become a classic? This is another question I have, and I'd be interested, especially knowing that Black women weren't produced, and so their plays weren't really recorded until, especially in America, until the 20th century. So what is the cutoff for a classic? Like when do we say, okay, this isn't contemporary anymore, this is a classic, or this isn't a classic, it's contemporary, and it could become a classic, but yeah.
I think the criterion that we talked about before, when those things are present, even though it's a contemporary play, you can know it's a classic.
That it's going to be yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if something needs to build up its reputation over time, that's
right.
Like we get into that. Once you get to the next theater generation,
right,
you qualify for a classic.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. It just makes me think about, just the work that we're doing and what that means for the next generation and what we bring in as classics. I don't want to bring it down because I feel like we're on a hopeful note, but I would also love to hear about some of we talked a little bit about it, but some of the hurdles that you've faced predominantly in the classics, whether that's, performing, producing, directing, like what has been one of your biggest hurdles in being a Black woman in the classic? Doesn't even need to be directing something that's written by a Black woman that's a classic, but just being a Black woman in this realm of classics.
I think that the thing that you mentioned earlier, that the notion that Black classics don't exist,
Mm-hmm.
or Black people in classic work don't exist. So, and there's no desire or impulse to work to find a place for us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's one thing to say, I wouldn't expect to see a Black woman in this place.
Yeah.
But the idea is, if you're looking at it and you don't see us, why don't you ask the question, how could a Black woman be in the world of this play?
Yeah.
How would the play change if a Black woman were included in the world of this play? Like, that's the short-sightedness that makes me crazy.
Yep.
Because we should, people should look around and miss that we're not there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They should look and see and notice that we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not there, then there's a whole realm of discussion about the topic, whatever topic it is, that is missing.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say it is a lot of the time the default lens is usually the issue, or the masculinization of Black women's bodies.
Yeah.
Classic work especially. That has been a hurdle. When it comes to directing, I can be a bit of a bullheaded person. So sometimes things that other people would be like, well, that's your challenge. And I was like, I don't know if it was a challenge. I was just going to go in and do it anyway. So.
Right.
So, those have been some of the it has to be a push.
Mm-hmm.
Is why it's not as easy as white men directing Shakespeare or Marivaux or Molière. It's like, oh no, I'm doing it this way, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that I my biggest struggle actually has been me, which is for a long time I went into situations thinking about the next job. Right? And I stopped directing the thing in front of me because I was trying to be nice to get the next job.
Yeah.
I wanted them to invite me back, so I tried to be overly gracious. But all of my worst work has been when I was playing small. When I was trying to get along and not standing up for the play.
Yeah.
And I realized at some point that I have to be ferocious for the play. I have to protect it like it's a child, right? And when I get distracted into my own thing, I make really shitty work. And I don't want to do that. So then I also don't want to be, belligerent all the time. What I've been teaching myself to do is to just be honest. So I could say to a producer, I thought we wanted to make the best possible production of this play. And if we do, then I'm going to need these things. If we're not going to get the things, then we have to agree that we're not trying to make the best possible production of the play. And if you're telling me an adequate production is good enough, then I don't need that. And more times than not, I get the thing. I just keep trying to hold out the vision that we all agreed we were trying to accomplish.
Right.
But when I was younger, I wasn't that strategic about it. I would just rip somebody's head off because they didn't get me the thing.
I found, and I think it's also because before I went to grad school, directing was that really siloed place, and Anne Bogart gave us this tool where we, as a cohort, can come together and create a war table. So anytime I was facing any sort of adversity, I'd be like, I'm calling a war table.
Yeah.
This is happening. Can you believe this theater is doing da, da, da? And we would come up with multiple solutions. So it just felt like I was fortified a lot of times to be like, okay, I'm going into battle and I'm going into battle for these things. And I have the right, the audacity, to demand them.
Yeah. Because one of my struggles, which I hear this response in what I've come up against, is just that I should be happy with what I've gotten, that that what it's been given to me is just like, that's enough. Like we've done this Black play, we've done that for you. Now let's sit back and watch white people do theater, right? And it's like, but and that's been, I feel, I hear that in making yourself small to play nice to then get the next job. But yeah, it's like, you have to fight for that story. You have to fight for yourself as an artist. You have to fight for the story that you're telling, and moving past that. It's definitely, I hear it. I hear that.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest obstacles for me, was how to learn to be myself, to be all myself all the time.
Yeah.
And deliver my work through that, with that person in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing that the story that you want to tell is worth telling, that there's, that has a place, definitely is hard. I think we've done a lot of work about talking about, what we've done. And I know that you both have had a lot of impact in your communities. But I want to know in a general sense, and I've talked about the Harlem Renaissance, all that good stuff, but how do you think Black women have influenced the classics as we know them? In what, we talk about Shakespeare had his mistress and he wrote that sonnet, and there's, the thought that it was a Black woman, or, that Black women were the force behind the Harlem Renaissance. And it wasn't Langston Hughes. It wasn't, they obviously had an impact, but their guiding force was the women who had been doing the work. So I just love to hear, what ways have we impacted, and do we continue to impact and influence the classics?
We have, and I think we will continue to. Like, for me, in some ways, it reminds me of Black church.
Mm.
Like we have like some amazing charismatic pastors who can like raise the hair on your arm with their eloquence and the power of their delivery. But the people who keep the church running are Black women.
Yeah.
We know how to organize. We know how to get the most out of the least. We know how to persevere. What's that book? All the women are white, all the Blacks are men, but some of us are brave.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We know what it is to sit at the intersection of the power dynamics and figure out how to survive. And I think we do that in our theater making as well.
Yeah.
I think that idea that if I don't have a theater space, I'll do it in my living room. That's the spirit of a sister for real.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make the costumes. I'll trade with NJ for the thing that she has, and we'll make it work. And I also think there is a deep spirituality, a connection to those who came before, whatever higher power you might believe in. It walks with us. The energy of that divineness walks with us, and it's a part of everything we make. The way that the smallest things can be magnified to serve the greatest good.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a thing that we do. I also think that there is, through us and our culture, there's a musicality to language. What we do with rhythm and sound when we're speaking any text, classic text, hip hop, spoken word, contemporary English, Ebonics, whatever the language is, there's a rhythm and a color to what it is that we do, how we speak, and what comes across when we talk that I think is unique to us.
Yeah.
There's a kind of warmth to what it is we do, and also a fire.
Yeah.
It goes beyond warm to fire. So I think in that way, all the stereotypes have served us, and through them, we have served the art.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in addition to that, the Black experience, the Black female experience runs the gamut, that it is very eclectic. It is very, it is all encompassing. That is another way that we constantly show up in theater, in film, just full embodiment of these experiences, of these characters, of these lives, to the point where people recognize parts of themselves in that.
Yeah.
That is a constant. Yeah.
While I was listening to you both speak, I had a thought that I was just like, I realized maybe one facet of the Black female experience that's kind of missing, or that I haven't yet to see, so correct me if it's there and I'm just not seeing it, is queer Black women on stage in theater. I feel like that's a story that is still not being told, and that's, or that I don't have that, or like it is not in my purview, which is also an issue with myself, right? Of like, what theater am I exposing myself to? And I fully acknowledge that. But also in the realms I inhabit, in the circles I inhabit, I feel like, and I want to make sure that all of Black female experience is included in the classics, in storytelling and theater. And I was just thinking that, I was like, that is something that I need to work on, right? That I need to widen my view of in terms of the classics. I know that we're at time. Are there any closing remarks that you both want to make in terms of Black women in the classics?
I'm just glad to be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's a chance to do my work,
Yeah.
Just happy to be able to continue to explore experiences and continue to bring things to the stage, to champion them. That is just my hope, yeah.
And Shannon, we're going to start making sure that you get in the way of some Black queer plays.
Please.
They're out here.
I'm directing one at Steppenwolf in February.
No, I mean, I acknowledge that it is a lane that I have not veered into, that I need to veer into. So I was like, this is something, obviously, yeah. Anyways.
So just plan to come to Chicago in February. No, in April next year for last night and the night before.
Okay, I will be there.
There are a couple of things done just in Brooklyn, and at the what is that new place? The Mercury store. Yeah. So
yeah,
there are a couple of companies dedicated to queer Black women and queer Black art. So
I'm doing the research as we log off. Thank you both for being in this conversation and for doing the work that you do. I truly appreciate it. I appreciate you both taking the time. I know we're all busy to talk about this, because I think it's important and it's necessary to talk about. So just thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. mean, we could also keep talking.